So welcome everyone. As you begin to sign in, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat and tell us who you are and who you're with. And we'll be starting the webinar shortly. So again, as you sign in, feel free to put your name and your affiliation in the chat so that our presenters can say hello and know who all is in the audience. And we'll be getting started shortly. All right, welcome everyone. This is Erin Donovan. I'm the Interim Director for the AIA New Orleans. Thank you all for joining us today for our presentation on improving healthcare outcomes through prefab interior construction, brought to you by our professional affiliate members at AOS. A note up top about the format here. So all of our participants are going to be muted, but you will be able to use the Q&A and the chat function to submit questions to presenters. And there will be some time at the end of the presentation where we'll go through those questions and try to get as many of them answered as possible. We will be making a recording of this webinar available afterward through our website, so stay tuned for that. And just in case you run into any issues with Zoom during the course of this webinar, we're a small team, so we can't really troubleshoot for you, but you should have a backup phone number so that you can call in to the Zoom presentation if for whatever reason you lose your internet connection. So as I said, we'll be hearing a presentation on improving healthcare outcomes through prefab interior construction by Rebecca Cooley at AOS. We'll have a brief Q&A, and then we will close out with some upcoming events that we are running here at the AIA. So Rebecca Cooley, our presenter today, brings over 11 years of industry experience to her role as Vice President of Manufactured Construction Division for AOS. Rebecca joined the DIRT Network in 2010 as a DIRT champion for the North Florida area. Prior to DIRT, Rebecca earned a bachelor's in interior design from Louisiana State University and immediately moved to London to work for a retail giant in their store development department. She's been a licensed interior designer in Texas, Florida, and Louisiana, and worked for multiple architecture and design firms, with projects ranging from public institutional facilities up to 430,000 square feet to luxury multifamily housing to corporate facilities. She currently leads AOS's interior construction team in Louisiana and Mississippi. And Rebecca, we'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you guys for joining us today. I'll definitely have to text Peter and say he had impeccable timing calling during the introduction. Well, yeah, thank you guys for joining. I'm going to share my screen. I want to reiterate what was stated about the chat window. We will have some interactive questions during the presentation, and I'm really looking to you guys to provide some insight on your own industry experience to help guide this conversation. So I am going to share, and we'll see if that works. There we go. All right, is everyone seeing the screen? Maybe Erin, you can.
Yep, looks good.
Lauren, all right, great. Well, we will get started then. So as I mentioned, we're really going to be talking about building with benefits and how to harness multi-trade offsite construction, specifically in the healthcare spaces. This is a very long, complicated word, multi-trade offsite construction. You may have heard it as in my bio, manufactured interior construction, prefab construction. Some of these words are interchangeable and some are not, so we will discuss a little bit of that. But unfortunately, it's going to be a mouthful a little bit, and I may abbreviate it to MTOC, which would be multi-trade offsite construction as we go through. You are going to get a credit today, and we will be reporting the credit for you. And so please reach out to our team if you have any questions on that. The objectives today, we're going to talk a lot about how multi-trade offsite construction gives you the opportunity to control cost. That's a big driver within any project. I've never worked on a project that didn't have a budget, never worked on a project that wasn't over budget, and that we didn't have to do my favorite process, which is value engineering, otherwise known as value removal, during a project. So how can we control cost early so that you have that information in early stages, and you can also control it during the construction process. We're also going to talk a little bit about how you can leverage multi-trade offsite construction to impact the schedule and how that impacts the entire project scope, sequencing, and how to communicate that to all the other trades. We'll talk about flexibility, life cycle cost, technology, and how we're able to accommodate any of those changes needed on site. And then we're also going to understand how we should document this type of delivery method. So the first question I'm going to open up to you guys is, what are your challenges with the current construction methods that you guys are using? So if y'all can use the little chat window and answer those questions. Unfortunately, we don't have all day to debate this. I'm sure you have lots of challenges, but just give me a couple that you have in the chat window. And Lauren, I can't actually share my full screen and see the chat window, so maybe you could shout out some of the answers that people are giving.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't have anything yet.
I saw that Kike's on the call, and I know you have some challenges.
All right, from Enrique, challenges, dirty site.
Dirty site, that's a good one. Safety is obviously a huge concern, especially in healthcare environments. So having a dirty site normally means that there's items that could cause potential risk for unsafe measures. So that's a good one. What are some other challenges that you guys are finding with construction?
Another one from Enrique, lots of waste.
Oh. Waste. I'm sorry, did my screen stop sharing?
No, your screen is sharing. It is not in presentation mode.
All right.
From Alexandra, multiple subs on site. Challenge.
Subs, coordinating subcontractors. Good, all good answers. Well, I'm going to take that as most of your construction projects go very well. There's no challenges, no cost overruns.
There's one more here. Coordination between trades.
Coordination between trades, yes. That is definitely a huge struggle through the process when you have multi-trades that are all working on a certain part of the space where you have to coordinate between scheduling, details, lead times, sequencing, and there's not enough fee for construction administration normally as well. Awesome. Well, thanks for providing some of those challenges, and I might give you a few more hints on some other challenges that we've seen in the process. So one of the major items that we're hearing from a lot of the general contractors, even our local market, is a lack of skilled labor. So being able to find the trades necessary to actually execute the work that the architect team has designed. The interesting part about a multi-trade offsite method is that the skilled labor actually looks very different. Is that we're seeing skilled labor from an engineering perspective, from a technology-driven perspective. So our laborers are now behind equipment or behind a computer or behind artificial intelligence goggles, as opposed to actual on-site cutting items. So if we're able to shift our mindset a little bit of what's needed, what skill is actually needed for a construction project, we could actually tackle that, the first one. Second challenge I hit on is always budget. How are we going to stay within the budget of the project? Schedule, it's a big one. Schedule overruns within a project, and then the industry silo, which I think a couple of you guys hit on, which is just coordinating all of the different trades that are required to build it, and are we collaborating and working as a team? And we're finding a lot of silos, and we're also seeing silos between the architecture and design side to the construction, to the consultant phase, and so forth. And how can we bring all of those groups together to have a cohesive process? So the next thing we'll just touch on is, what are we seeing the owner's desires to? So you think about a large healthcare system, is what do the owners actually care about? You know, what we found is that healthcare executives don't necessarily care how their building is built, what particularly are the materials used. It's more, does it function properly? What is the outcome? Is the outcome servicing the needs that my individual healthcare providers need and that the patients need in our spaces? And so it's really all about the outcome of that space. So we see, you know, speed to market, needing to be open faster, operating, servicing the community, and also generating revenue. The capital budget, obviously we have to meet their budget. How are they going to manage that change? So whether it's a renovation of existing space, an addition onto an occupied facility, or a change in the behavior to which they're going to actually deliver that care, how are they going to manage that? The life cycle impact obviously refers to, you know, going back to the budget, which is there's a capital budget and there's obviously a maintenance budget, and how is this space going to behave over time, and how is it going to remain adaptable and flexible for a budget that we can manage, that we can adapt to technology. So again, we're going to constantly be changing how we deliver care, and how can, what are the costs and the impact of making those upgrades to accommodate that. And the last thing is sustainability. I'd be curious on the call, who's working with any healthcare facilities where one of their top 5 desires is actually sustainability. Maybe we get a little hand raise in the chat. Is anybody? Lauren, you're gonna have to help me. Sorry, I can't see the chat.
No one so far.
No one. I have to say, I was actually shocked by this, so I wanted to see sort of the local input. This is obviously a national data that we're looking at here, and so sustainability, they're seeing that in other markets, as that's one of their top 5 drivers. Now, sustainability can be looked at multiple ways, and we'll approach that later on in the presentation. And then how do we bring those two together? So we obviously have our construction challenges. We then have the desires from the actual hospital systems. And then how can we leverage this multi-trade offsite manufactured construction to meet the needs of both of those items? So the number one thing is the faster construction method. If we're able to take 12 to 14 trades, use technology, build them in a factory, pre-assemble them, and then just have tilt-up construction on the interior, that is going to meet the needs, again, of that faster construction method. How fast can we open this facility? The second item is that cost certainty. So we look at, you know, their main driver is budget, is that we can provide cost certainty through, again, a technology software-driven approach. creating a flexible, adaptable interior to accommodate changes throughout the facility, and then lowering their overall maintenance costs, again, through a flexible, accessible system. And then how do we change material and behavioral sustainability? So we'll look at how this multi-trade approach can also help with that solution as well. So the first thing we want to talk a little bit about is off-site construction types. There's many, many different types of off-site construction types, and they're not all one size, and they can't meet sort of every need. So we'll take a few different approaches. Now, this is what we would refer to as conventional building. So we're going to actually use the same process. We're going to use the same materials and approach. We're just going to build pieces, parts, or maybe a whole unit off-site and then deliver it. So the first one that you're seeing here is just a pre-assembly approach. This is a HVAC rack system. We actually have some companies here that we have partnered with that create these types of pre-assembly. So what they do, again, the planning is going to be a little bit more proactive. They're going to source raw materials. They bring them into their local facilities, and then they're going to prefab individual units that they can then deliver to site. That's one approach. We see what we're referring to a little bit as a prefabricated approach. These are, again, you're planning exactly the same. You're sourcing the same materials. You're just taking that smaller chunk. So for example, we've seen in large healthcare facilities where they have prefab bathroom pods. So we take those materials, again, we're building them in a facility, and then we're going to deliver those to site. Some of the challenges with these two solutions, 1 and 2, is that you have to make decisions very early in the process. So you think about this restroom pod, you're having to deliver this pod while the building is completely open and exposed. This project could be a 2-year construction project, and we're not closing in that envelope till 1 year in, which means you've had to make every decision on layout, design, and finishes very, very early in that process so that this can be delivered. One of the other downfalls of this type of approach is that it's not as safe as some of the other pre-assembly approaches, again, because you're delivering very large, heavy items, but there's also a lot of risk when you're delivering elements that are already pre-finished in this way that could be damaged during transport, during lifting, and during the time when they're actually putting them into the site. And then the last item that you see here in the right-hand corner is going to be a modular approach. This is where we're taking even a larger sort of section of that building. Here they've actually pre-assembled almost to the size of shipping containers that they're delivering and putting in place. So they're all different types of off-site construction, but it's not actually consolidating the trades. They're using the same number of trades. They're just coordinating them off-site as opposed to coordinating them on-site, which again allows for some benefits, but not all benefits. So conversely, when we look at the multi-trade item in a manufactured solution, is that we're combining up to 15 trades, as I mentioned earlier, all through the same type of technology. So we're speaking the same language. We're using that technology to drive the coordination. So we're not having to pull the 15 trades in to individually coordinate them. And we're streamlining that process that would normally be very time consuming. You just think about the contracts alone for all these different trades takes a lot of time. And then we're able to consolidate the manufacturing to one facility. So we're streamlining processes, and we're guaranteeing a certain fit and finish level and coordination within that process. So what are some of our sort of adoption barriers? I love this unsad face. People, actually. You know, generally when we talk about all of the benefits and we say if we're engaged as a peer collaborator early in the process, if we are able to work as an extension of the architecture team and as the general contractors, and we're able to educate everyone in the process, it should not cost more to build this way. So if it doesn't cost more and you're having a more streamlined process, you're getting a higher fit and finish, and then we're also allowing for that future flexibility, adaptability in the future. Why doesn't everyone build this way? And number one is people, is really just change, and it's understanding, sort of having that knowledge of how this process will be different and how we will affect their day-to-day life. It's a very understandable sort of real reason why we may not work this way. So the other is for fear of perceived risk. You know, it's interesting. I had a client, actually a healthcare client, say that with conventional construction, we have a lot of challenges, but we know what the challenges are. With this, it may present new challenges that we weren't aware of. So again, it's that perceived risk of not knowing what you don't know, and changing. And so again, this all takes education throughout that process. The second, I would say, adoption of barrier is the considerations. So the owner's capacity to evaluate that impact across their organization. I was working with another healthcare client who was trying to react to some of the rapid healthcare needs that were brought on by COVID. And schedule was the number one driver. Well, this is obviously the fastest way that you can build with a certain level of fit and finish that we can then reuse over time and repurpose over time as maybe the needs change with this unknown thing that we're dealing with right now. And that was the number one driver, is that we don't necessarily have the time to then evaluate the impact and also get buy-in from all of the other stakeholders in the organization. So from the CEO to the facility manager team to our actual deliverers of care, do we have the time to do that? So that's one of the considerations that comes into play, having the team to deploy the delivery method. So we are talking about a comprehensive interior construction process and solution. It's going to take all of the different stakeholders in a project to understand. So that goes again from the owner group that we just mentioned, the architecture and design team, all of the consultants. So from electrical engineering, plumbing, AV, how do we integrate technology to accommodate equipment, all the way down to the contractor, the subcontractors. And so it's important that we need a whole team that understands that delivery method, or at least has the willingness to adopt sort of a different approach. So we really need a progressive sort of mindset. And the third is having the right contract type. And we'll go into a little bit of detail on contract delivery methods. And Lauren, I'm just going to stop there and just say, if we get any questions during the chat, if you don't mind letting me know, we can stop and answer those at any time. So going further into those contract types is design, bid, build. You guys are all familiar with. It's very pretty typical path that we see during a project delivery. Design, build, which I normally like to call build then design, because they normally like to get things started faster before the design's complete. And then the third is an integrated form of agreement. We've also seen IPDs, integrated project delivery models, where we're bringing all the stakeholders to the table early and having a very collaborative process. And I'm sure there's plenty of other contract types that you guys are working with. But typically in our market, we're seeing mainly number one and number two. And that sometimes they feel it prohibits bringing that multi-trade offsite construction to the table because the contract may not be able to be realized during that type of delivery model, which we will talk a little bit how that's not the case. And then the other is engagement, which I'd mentioned earlier. So early engagement is very important, being a peer collaborator early in the process, not to drive design, but to just be that resource and expert on manufactured construction through the process. Because we do have obviously the tools that help inform constructability. They inform pricing very early on. Are we in that budget? And how can we look at reducing cost if we realize we're getting a little bit out of that budget throughout the process? So that's how our engagement can be a benefit to you during that process. We also have the ability through our software to create deliverables. So in my earlier past life, when I was an interior designer, I thought I had this dream that I was going to be in the field all the time. Turns out I was stuck behind a computer a lot longer than I thought, and I spent probably about 10% of my time researching, 10% designing, and about 80% documenting. And this was pre-Revit, so if you made a change in one area, you had to then go make changes in 15 different other places in the documents and so forth. And so it was interesting when this came along. It was pretty mind-blowing how we could utilize technology where we won't necessarily flop the time commitment, but maybe we get to 50-50, where the architecture team could spend about 50% of their time programming, which I find is sometimes a lost part of the process just because of fee or maybe the delivery model. Spending more time designing, researching, detailing some of those items that are highly custom in the space, and then only spending about 50% of your time documenting. So leveraging the technology and the deliverables that we can generate for you so that you can spend more of your time on the other item. And the ultimate thing that we want to provide is to provide a smoother process, a better outcome for you and your client, all while maintaining a profit for the architecture firm, which is very important. And then going a little bit into the sustainability factor. So I don't know how many of you on the call are engaged in Lean. So there's a local chapter of LCI, Lean Construction Institute, which talks a lot about processes and how we can really lean the process. But it's a lot about sustainability. This is truly, by multi-trade offsite construction, is the most sustainable way that you can build by nature. So by utilizing the technology, we are then able to yield the most usable quantity out of each raw material. And then any material or leftover is not waste. It's either used on another project or it's recycled immediately and put back into that raw material. So we utilize recycled aluminum, we utilize MDF that's recycled, and then it's all water-based paints and stains throughout the process as well. The other thing everyone loves is that our insulation is a recycled denim insulation. So some of your old blue jeans may actually be inside your walls at this point. I don't know if you like that or that may freak you out a little bit. The other part of this whole process of the 3 R's is that most people focus a lot on the reduce part and the sort of recycled content part. And we want to focus a lot on reducing. So removing a lot of waste out of the process and also out of the materials themselves. And not just with our scope, but how we impact all of the other scopes on the trade. So floor covering, ceiling, reducing their waste. And then the reuse part. So if we have, during this process, anything ends up in a landfill, then we have sort of failed at our job. We want to reuse all of the components and they can be reused in a totally different way. So sustainability really is just standard with this type of process. So we start looking at a little bit deeper. This is just a chart that sort of explains some of the things I just talked about. But we want to really eliminate, again, that waste factor that is not just from our scope, but is from the other trades. If they are not having to cut around all of the partitions in a space, like floor covering does, if they are not having to pull all of their raw materials to site and cut everything in the field that then goes, any of the waste goes into a bin outside, then we have done our part with reducing our overall footprint. The nice thing is that we actually have sustainability reports. So if you have a client that chooses to build out this way, we actually can create a report for you that says, this is the percentage that you've actually made a positive impact on the environment by building this way, as opposed to if you would have built it conventionally. So we can share that as a follow-up as well. I'm just going to stop there and check in with Lauren, see if anybody's coming on the chat.
Unfortunately not.
Unfortunately, okay. No problem. That means I'm answering everyone's questions. Just want to make sure that we are doing that. All right. So that was a sustainability in terms of material. Now we're going to talk about behavioral sustainability. We live in an environment where the way we build now, everything's conventional. So we build it to suit in a conventional manner. It meets all of our needs on day one. You as architects are doing your best job with all of the information that we have to create an environment that is going to last the life cycle of that building. So it could be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. The issue with that is that you do address all of the foreseen needs. The problem is that there's so many unknowns, take into consideration what we're going through right now, that there is no way for us to predict what will happen. So how do we create environments that are essentially future-proof? How can we create environments where we're able to actually access the cavity, add, change, remove, physically change spaces and the way they interact and function very simply, very cost effectively, and very fast? So obviously healthcare, there's no downtime. So the amount of time that we have to take rooms offline could be essential to the community. It could be essential to the business. And so how can we minimize that impact? And so that's what we're going to look at too, is that behavioral sustainability throughout that space. What you're seeing here is sort of how that offsite multi-trade is working. They're independent units and they're working together. So number one is showing the framework. So this is the recycled aluminum framing. And then we're going to look at number two, what are those services that we're bringing through the space? Are we accommodating technology in the wall? Are we accommodating med gases, electrical needs? And all of these items, again, are independent of the framework. And then what is the actual aesthetic of the space? So what materials are we using to meet infection prevention needs? Are we integrating positive distraction in the space? So graphics, wayfinding, et cetera. And are we providing, down here you see a thermofoil finish, which is a highly durable finish where a bed may be. You'll notice there's not a bed locator here. And all three of those things are all acting independently of each other. So you'll see we have the framework here, but on the face, it's one large unit that's actually bypassing that frame. And so how can we design for disassembly? This is DFD. We want to design that, again, meets our needs today, but could also meet whatever may be thrown at that healthcare system in the future. So here's an example of a project for Mercy Hospital. This was actually a retrofit within their unit where they came in and wanted to provide this upgraded head walls that would need new services through the space. So it was going to be more challenging and more disruptive to actually cut in the sheetrock to make those changes, that they decided to actually do what we're going to call a curtain wall. And they just put that multi-trade offsite construction right in front of their existing wall. That means that they did not have to shut down a whole wing to make this upgrade. They were able to come in and do one room at a time. So through this space, you'll see they're incorporating those three steps that I mentioned earlier. So we're seeing the framework here. We're seeing the gases and the services that are coming through the space. Then obviously you see the finishes and what is that aesthetic and durable surface that we're using throughout that space. This whole project, there's 29 rooms, and it actually only took 2 days to complete and only 4 men. So the schedule is a big impact, again, that we're able to help drive the needs of that healthcare system, again, of not being down for an extended period of time throughout that space. So sort of as a synopsis, can't say that word, of sustainability is that it's faster, it's greener, and it's better. I like to say faster, cleaner, smarter. But the faster portion of that item is that if we are building things in a sustainable manufacturing method, we're then using less men. So in this case, 4 men, 2 days, and all of these items that you see here were manufactured in less than 4 weeks, is that if we had to build this conventionally, we can count up the number of trades that would be in this application. So we have thermofoil, we have graphic glass panel, we have medical gases, we have a brazier, we have the electrical units, We have a casework, millwork installer. We have low voltage going through the space. We also have the studs and regular finishing, and we have floor base throughout that facility. So I just counted up 9 trades that would be required to build this. And so instead of 4 men, we're talking 9 trades that may have 4 each. And then they're going to drive back and forth from the site. Let's say this space, instead of taking 2 days, took 30 days. So we're now looking at 36 people driving back and forth throughout the site. So speed plays a factor on this lower carbon footprint item. And again, this is something that we can provide data to you and your client. We're using less waste, obviously, so we have a greener and a cleaner solution that we're providing. And now we've created that change in behavioral sustainability. You know, I always say, if your client's going to invest in these materials, let's make sure they're working for them, and they're working for them for the lifetime of that solution. So we'll look at a case study of this clinic. So that was obviously a small sort of retrofit. This is going to be a larger ground up clinic. And we'll see how we're deploying all of those advantages in this space. So this was a 6,500 square foot clinic. It only took 29 days for us to build our scope. On September 1st, they were cutting through and they were cutting out floor coring for all the plumbing that was needed throughout this space. So it was currently a shell space, just to give you a little bit more background throughout that space. They were cutting into the existing concrete, running all those services overhead and then underneath. Now they're pouring back the slab within that facility. So that was September 1st. So from October 31st, they have the warm shell created. So it took them 60 days to go from a cold shell to a warm shell, which would include running all overhead, so life safety, HVAC, some of the low voltage was run. We have the ceiling grid in place and the floor covering. Now you can get a great sense to how we are impacting the other trades, from a schedule savings, from decreasing the waste that's needed on site, and also in a sustainability factor. So this ceiling, instead of being, let me go back to that floor plan so you get an idea.
Hey, Rebecca.
Really
quick, we do have a question.
Okay.
Which division are these components specified? And were all these components part of the modular head bed?
Great. Yeah, let me go back to that image. That's a great question. So all of the items that are included in the multi-trade offsite construction is in one division. It's in Division 13. So that's under special construction. The name of the section is Integrated Interior Assemblies, and it encompasses everything that you see here. The items that would not be included would be this monitor. So this is an Epic system that the healthcare system is standardized on. So we just accommodated the blocking, the installation, and the wiring for all the AV. So that's one item that would not have been accommodated. These med gases that you see here, we are not producing, let me use this image. We're not producing these med gases from scratch. The healthcare system would tell us what type of med gases they're wanting to use in the space, whether it's Amico or a similar system, is we would source them, and then we provide either a flex med gas solution or a copper solution within that wall frame. And then, so what you see here, and this thing came straight from the factory that way. So all of the trades are again, encompassed in our factory. I think that may have answered the question. If that did not, please send me a follow-up. So now we'll go back to our sequencing. So we talked a little bit about the ceilings. So as opposed to going into each individual room, laser and leveling that individual room, hanging the J molding, and so forth, that all takes about 30 minutes to an hour per room. So what we're doing is we're creating a wide open environment for all of the trades to work in. This is critical to that point number one. What is the biggest barrier to building with multi-trade offsite? Is that we are impacting every single trade on the job site. So we have to make sure that each trade is not only educated, that they fully understand, they price it properly, they source their materials to the right quantity, which is less than they need, and they're scheduling and staffing the job properly. And I'm here to tell you it can be done. We have completed over 800 projects successfully within Southeast Louisiana and Mississippi. And so it can be done, but it does take education. Same thing happens with the floor covering. So the floor covering is going to go in that wide open space. So we're going to eliminate the need for, let's say, a 20% waste factor because you're not having to cut around the wall frames. You're going to just run this floor covering in the wide open space. An interesting fact is the waste factor varies greatly, as you probably know. So if you're using a carpet tile, we may see a 5 to 7% pickup in that overall scope. So if a floor covering sub was building this conventionally and it cost $100,000 to lay his floor tile in this method, it would cost him $93,000. So that $7,000 adds up. For some of our healthcare spaces where you may be using a continuous floor covering, so let's say a sheet vinyl, and we actually want to flash cove up the wall, sheet vinyl has a 40% waste factor. So we're going to be eliminating that. So that could go from a 7% savings to a 20% savings because of the type of floor covering you're using. So there's all these little interesting nuances that play a very important part to the pricing being successful. So now that we've gotten the warm shell complete in 60 days, some of our items start to come into play. So with some of the multi-trade, we're bringing in some of our pre-wired electrical items. So what you're seeing on the right-hand side is a J-box that has a quick connect coming out. The top, you're seeing a zone box. So this can run up to 16 circuits. This box can run up to 3 circuits, and this whip runs 3 circuits, and it's all plug and play. So we are now eliminating the need for an electrician to run conduit throughout the space, bending the conduit, hanging it, pulling his 8 wires through the conduit, providing a device, etc. So we see about a 20 to 30% pickup in electrical. So we start providing these items, and then we begin our layout. So you can barely see it, but there's a reverse U channel here that we are hanging onto the track, and that is going to dictate where all of those divisions are for the space. So we are starting on October 31st with the multi-trade offsite. Now, meanwhile, we're going to back it up for 4 weeks before that. We're starting to build all of those elements that you see there. So all of the elements in Division 13, we are using that technology. We're driving our equipment on the manufacturing floor, and we're cutting all of these items and pre-assembling them. You'll see here our framework. You can see they're putting in the insulation. They're lining up all of our power outlets that are pre-wired, and we have a plug-and-play whip connected to that. We're then going to start on that November 1st date. So we bring in all of our frames. You see those items here, and we're going to start standing those items. So from November 1st to November 4th, we have all of our frames installed. So it took 3 days to go from completely open space to enclosed spaces. This is generally when, I'll go back, this is generally when people are very worried because normally they just like to see progress, right? And this is when people are blown away. They're like, oh, I get it now. And that's part of that adoption, is going through a process. So we do have to take a couple steps back to then go 10 forward, and just to gain familiarity with the different process. So we've now stood all of our frames. We're making all of our rough-in connections. So you can see we are, we did not embed the stacks for the plumbing, but we're just accommodating those. You can see some of the larger horizontally run plumbing here for the restrooms. And then you can start to see our finishes arrive on site. So these finished panels or tiles, they actually have holes cut in from the factory. So all of those items are going to come together perfectly in the field, and we're going to snap them on in place. As simple as the tiles snap on in place, we have a tool where we can remove the tiles, and that's what allows us to have access to that cavity. So all those day 2 changes where we may need to accommodate a new piece of equipment, or we need to accommodate a new oxygen because we're under a crisis, we're able to do that within 30 minutes and with one individual trade. Here you can see we're starting to install our millwork in the space as well. So all of these items have been coordinated. So the blocking is already embedded from the factory. The electrical is behind the cabinet to accommodate a piece of equipment. And all of that's being put in place. And then you can see in our restrooms, again, we had blocking accommodated for handrails. And the beauty is that we always have access to the cavity. So if some design changed within those 4 weeks, we can actually just remove that finish tile and we can add a 2x4 to accommodate blocking, as opposed to cutting open the sheetrock and then having to add the blocking, patch, paint, etc. Again, we're trying to streamline the amount of coordination and trades so that everything is more seamless. So here you can see on November 30th, we have a completely finished space. I'm going to say that again. On November 30th, we have a completely finished space. So I'm going to go back and show you, this was November 1st. This was September 1st. This was November 1st. And this is November 30th. So in 30 days, we took that site from almost a worm shell to completely finished, moved in. You can see all of their equipment's in place. They're ready for opening. This client said they have actually never opened a clinic on time, and they actually opened early than they expected. And you can see we're using some of the solid surfacing on these transaction counters. Obviously, there was blocking provided for hand sanitizers and so forth. There's some of the clinical environments. You can see here with some of the elements, they've included some glazing. So they allow for, there's obviously privacy in the space, but there's some of that light transferring through into some of the internal spaces, which are nice. And they're utilizing higher grade materials. So that thermofoil on some of the millwork is very nice when we're talking about wet areas. There's no edge banding. It's a completely seamless corner. So there's not a risk that we could have some bacteria fester, could delaminate, crack, etc. The other thing I'll point out on all of these items is that everything has a 10-year warranty. And so again, making sure that we're protecting the investment of that healthcare facility over the life cycle of use. And, you know, as most of you know, you get a 1-year warranty on conventional construction. So a 10-year warranty is very beneficial, especially these are just high abuse 24/7 facilities generally. So when we start to talk about cost, I'm sure some of you guys on this call have seen this before, is that where is that money truly going? So in a conventional method, 70% of your client's budget is going to labor. So 70% of the space that we're leaving them, we can't actually see. They only have about 30% of that money that they can touch, feel, that is actually in the healing spaces of their environment. It's a pretty shocking number when I saw this. I've heard a little bit 65-35, but pretty close to that number. On the conversely, offsite multi-trade construction, we're flip-flopping the pots of money. I will have to say locally, I'm seeing about 20% is actually spent on labor and 80% on materials. This is important. Again, what type of materials are we using in the space? Do we have the right infection prevention? Are we leaving them with an adaptable environment? So we're actually putting the majority of the budget into the items that we're leaving with the client and that they can actually see. The other interesting fact is that when we build conventionally, and you're spending only 30% of your budget on materials, when you have to go through that fun phase of value engineering, is that we generally don't kick people off the job site, or we don't say, let's just extend the schedule another 6 months, is that we're going to start cutting from the materials. So now those highly durable finishes that you've selected to meet the needs of the facility, to meet the client's desires, is what we're cutting. So we're going to use a different type of floor covering. We're going to use a different type of wall finish. We're going to have those really pretty corner guards there, as opposed to a nicer sort of integrated solution that's going to protect that surface, right? So we start squunching this 30% material. So if we allow ourselves to spend more time on materials by changing the way that we're deploying construction as a whole, we now have more money to spend. So you can have all of those elements that you need. So we're creating a more durable environment that should withstand time. The other item that's a major change is just the sequencing. So we saw in one of the examples I showed earlier is we're really either removing some of these trades or we're accelerating their scope. And so currently conventional is very linear. If one trade gets behind, the other, everyone's behind because it's very sequential. We have to wait on the previous person to finish their work. Or my favorite, the stud layout is first. So we now have to work around all of those obstructions. What we're able to do with offsite is just eliminate obstructions. So I think Kike touched on, a dirty site. Well, what if we just eliminate all of those materials that are normally brought to site? What if we eliminate 80% of the cutting that generally happens on site? What if we remove 80% of the waste that we're generally creating on site? That's how we're able to accomplish, a cleaner, safer job site. So as we start looking at that schedule, first we'll just look at a conventional construction schedule. How are we impacting those trades that I keep talking about? So you'll see here that this is a 17-week schedule. So it's pretty good. And we start to see how each trade is dependent upon the trade before them, right? We're going to go through. So if we look at the 17-week schedule conventionally, and then conversely, how would it look if we built it with a manufactured construction solution, is that we still have the same number of most of the trades here. We're just going to accelerate their schedule. So if we start to bring those items a little bit tighter together, we're also going to change the sequencing of our floor covering. So generally floor covering is last. We're now going to move that earlier up in the schedule. And at the same time that they're building out a more accelerated white box, we're then generating all of our items off site. So therefore that 17-week schedule is now a 14-week schedule. So I'll pose to you guys, what would that mean for your client for them to get into their space 4 weeks sooner? Would it mean that they could generate 4 more weeks of revenue? Would it mean they could get out of a swing space? Would it mean we could accommodate some of the newer technology to allow for new services that we couldn't accommodate with our old space? What would that mean to your client, the 4 weeks? And I generally say, we're just able to get your clients in on the day we say we'll be able to get them in. There's going to be some unforeseen item, or there's going to be change, in the way that they deliver care throughout the process. So how can we just accommodate that during a construction process? And really this is how we're able to do that. So we'll talk a little bit about the process and the way that you guys, the architecture and design team, is going to play a big role in all of these items that we've mentioned. So the first thing is, how do we define the scope of work? So the scope of work is generally anything except for exterior of the building or any item that's fire rated at the moment. Other than that, we can build out the space. We then will take your design here, we'll take your floor plan, we then pull that into a software platform that's really that technology piece. This is the game changer. So we're going to take your design in, we're going to build in our BIM-like software that item. And this is how we get all of the information that we need early: constructability, engineering requirements, cost, and so forth. We're able to, I mentioned earlier, be an extension to you guys and take some of that production work off of you so that you can spend all of your billable hours doing things you actually enjoy doing. I want to see in the chat who loves doing millwork sections. Let me know. Who also loves writing CSI specs? No one, except for the one spec writer in your office. So what we're able to do is we're able to take some of those items off your plate. So we're building these elevations for you. You can see they're very detailed with dimension plans, elevations, embedded technology, door schedules, everything down. We're also able to create those visualizations as well. This is a big part of, integrating back with your base building design, making sure that's coordinated, and also providing tools very early on so that you can get answers from your ownership group. So most of, we say, I think about 5% of people can read and understand floor plans and elevations in 2D. So giving them these tools so that they can understand what the design looks like, and we can get answers quickly, and they feel confident in giving you answers. So hopefully we won't have a lot of changes in the future. And then behind all of that is really the manufacturing and engineering. So we're just looking at pretty pictures when really all the CNC code is written. If you and the client said yes to this, we would be on site in 3 weeks actually building out your space. So this is what allows for our completely custom design and a more systematic approach. It also is giving us all the pricing to the penny. You can see all the bill of materials. It's also generated, and it's that cost certainty. How will you sort of guarantee cost certainty throughout the project, during the design phase, during the construction phase? It's very difficult to do, and a lot of us just depend on the general contractors to manage that process. But what if we had a tool where you could have more control over that? And then obviously it has all of the logistics. So where are we shipping it from? When is it getting there? And how are we going to be entering your site? How will we be working with the individual site logistics, with all of your general contractor? Again, you're seeing all of the BIM integration. So the med gas placement, which I think is very important. How will we make sure that all of these devices are aligned? It's no way to do it in the field. So by doing it in the factory, we're paying attention to all of those details, really becoming a quality control additional member for your team. We're also defining responsibilities. So the biggest thing is with electrical is defining whose item is in whose scope. And again, that's very important when we're talking about pricing, and we want to define that early, and we want to have those conversations with your electrical engineer and your electrical contractor. I had an early question about specs. You beat me to it. So we can provide early narratives with the multi-trade approach. And you'll see here, this is just an example of some narratives that we can provide during SD. And then we can also get into more of the detailed CSI spec in Division 13. Now, this is the big key takeaway I want to give to you guys is how do we provide our drawings to make sure they understand it's multi-trade? And the key thing is you just remove it. So anything that the general contractor is not having his subs build would just be removed. So the top you see is a general floor plan, how we typically see it. The one below that is with all of the multi-trade offsite construction removed. That's a big difference. So this is how we can communicate properly to our floor covering sub, that it's just one large space. Our ceiling sub, one large space. Electrical, the list goes on and on, is how we communicate that. So if we look at a couple of floor plans, we'll see how are we approaching that. So any of the fire rated walls would not be included. And generally, if there's a core to the building, it may have stairwells, which are fire rated. It may have janitor closets. It may have IDF rooms, electrical, and some of them have larger restrooms. That may be something that's pulled off. And so you can kind of see how we're exhibiting that. We also can provide cost estimates. We have these on many jobs that we've completed, healthcare specific and otherwise, to show how much faster we can get someone into into their building, and what that means in terms of dollars. It's also a resource that we can provide with the offsite construction method. And it's also showcasing that the comparison is very in-depth, and again, it needs to be done at every level of the trade that we're impacting. So it's not just looking at sheetrock. And the other thing I would say is it's really about the scope. It's not about the scale of the project or the size of the project. It's about the method and the approach that we're taking to the project. So whatever we can do to provide really those two spaces. So you want to have just a wide open space. We want to create a ceiling and a floor plane, those two horizontal planes, and then leaving that wide open space for us to come in and build efficiently and also create the most flexibility moving forward for your client. So it doesn't matter if it's an 1,800 square foot space or a 260,000 square foot space, can still take into account all of those benefits. And we can talk through that with you guys. So sort of in summary, we'll just say the biggest benefit that we can provide here is that speed to market, which every healthcare owner is concerned about. We're maintaining cost control. So the costs that we're giving you at the beginning will be visibility and transparency all the way to the end. And that cost should not fluctuate. There is flexibility inherently. So whether we're accessing the cavity to add a new outlet or we're having to physically change the spaces, reconfigure them, we can. We want to have that life cycle impact as well. And then the sustainability aspect of it. So not only material, but also behavioral. All right. So with that, I know we're kind of getting right to the bottom of the hour. So I'm going to open it up and see if you guys have any additional questions.
We did have one other question come in. I thought I'd leave it to the end here. The question is, how much time did you spend with the designer during the design phase for this project versus a similar project which used conventional framing construction?
I think the question might be referring to, does it take longer to design, maybe? Because if we're not using offsite construction, I guess then I wouldn't be spending time with them. But there is more, I think in general, there's more planning up front from the front end. But I would like to say it's a systematic approach as opposed to a rigid approach or specifying a product, right? Because we're building custom, we're just using a system to help streamline and make more efficient process from design, manufacturing, and then installation. So the first time you work with sort of this new approach, there definitely is an education process that goes into play. So I would say the first time that you're approaching this, that there would be a little bit more time, just understanding and educating yourself on, I would like to say what people always want to know, what are the parameters? And my answer to that is, I can't give you 20 running feet of smooth surface. And that's about it. Everything else we can really build. It just may need additional engineering and some collaboration on it. So you should be able to design the way you've always designed. My flip side to that is, if you're designing with multi-trade offsite construction, you probably design differently. And I would say in a better way, maybe, is because we're building in the quality control factor. So you may be able to include materials or design ideas that maybe you didn't trust could be executed. You're able to have change in finishes or incorporate other systems that you may not have been able to before. And then if you're thinking about long-term flexibility for the client, that may inform some of the other items and design items in the space. So it may inform how your ceilings are changing or designed. It may inform how your floor covering may be a little bit different to accommodate that overall approach. So I think that's sort of the biggest part of kind of time on an education standpoint on the first project. But moving forward, you should gain back a lot more time and have, again, those certainty checkpoints in place. That was a long-winded answer, but I hope it answered your question. If not, follow up. Any other questions, Lauren?
We are not seeing any pop up right now.
Okay. Well, I will thank all of you guys for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I'm available to answer any questions at any time and would be happy to go into more detail here. I know we talked a lot about process. If anybody would like a follow-up with all of the pretty pictures of the way that we've been building out healthcare spaces, I'd be happy to follow up and do a virtual call with you guys. So my email address and my phone number is on the screen. And with that, I'll just turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Rebecca. We really appreciate it. I think all of our folks were really engaged as well. I'll just take a quick moment here to talk about a couple of our upcoming learning opportunities. We have several coming up in the coming weeks with our professional affiliate members, Sherwin-Williams, Construction Specialties, and Schluter. So be sure to head over to our website and sign up for those, or feel free to reach out to either myself or Lauren and join our LinkedIn page and check out our website again. And yeah, thank you so much, Rebecca and AOS, and everyone be well.
Thank you, guys.